Peach Blossom Det. Chapter 10. I had been chewing on a strip of dried bean curd, and now I watched blankly as Mu Ruian propped himself up and looked dazedly over. The innkeeper, standing beside me personally pouring wine for Heng Wen and me, froze in stupefaction. It had to be known that Mu Ruian had been lying bedridden for far too long, so when the innkeeper saw him sitting up by himself, it was like seeing Chang'e ascend the moon with his very own eyes. It worked him up till he trembled all over. After a while, he fell to his knees with a thud and cried, "Dao Zhang is truly a living immortal. Truly a living immortal." I stroked my beard and smiled, first at the innkeeper, and then at Mu Ruian. When I opened my mouth, I realized I had yet to swallow the dried bean curd. I did so with composure, then smiled again. "First," I said to the innkeeper, "it's nothing, no need to stand on ceremony." Then I affably asked Mu Ruian, "Young master, are you feeling a little better now?" Mu Ruian fixed his eyes on me, still looking a little dazed. "Young master," the innkeeper said, "you've been so sick these few days that you fell unconscious. It was all thanks to this Dao Zhang's divine medicine. How do you feel right now?" The dazed expression on Mu Ruian's face gradually receded. His mind must have cleared up. He straightened himself, his face awash with a weariness that was part self-derision. Then he schooled his expression and lifted the quilt. Jinluo Lingzi was potently effective, and to my surprise, he managed to stand on his first attempt. Taking over his outer robe from the waiter to drape over himself, he looked at me and said, "Please pardon me for my slovenly appearance. I heard it was all thanks to you for saving this humble one." I rose to my feet and raised a palm. "It's just some medicinal remedy this humble Daoist came across while roaming the world out there. As long as it helps to restore your health." "I am but a mere scholar," Mu Ruian said. "I have nothing to thank you with, so please accept my kowtow as an appreciation of my thanks." I was stunned when he bent his legs. To think Mu Ruian actually wanted to kneel to me? He who had no wish to live kneeling down to the person who saved his life. If that's not a joke, I don't know what is. Despite this thought, I found that my legs had strode forward, and I reached out to stop Mu Ruian from completing his kowtow. The clatter of a wine cup being set on the table rang out. I released my hands and stepped back. Raising my palm again, I said, "Benefactor, that is too much of a kowtow for this humble Daoist to accept. Since the Dao Zhang isn't willing to accept my kowtow, then please accept my bow," Mu Ruian said, and bowed deeply. Left with no other choice, I could only raise my palm and return the gesture, bowing deeply at the waist. "In the future, when I am able, I will surely repay your kindness to me," Mu Ruian said. "I go by the humble surname of Yan, and my name is Zimu. May I ask for your venerable name?" My, was Tianchi something else, even in the mortal world? He had only just returned to consciousness, and here he was, instantly conjuring a fake name without batting an eyelid. I raised my palm in greeting again. "That's putting it a bit strongly, benefactor. I truly don't deserve this. This Daoist's humble name is Guanjianzi. The others all call me Daoist priest Guanjiun." After going on and on for a bit and mutually trading some more civilities, I said, "Your health is just starting to show improvements, so you still need to recuperate in quietude for a few more days. Don't catch another cold. It'd be better to rest in bed." "Thank you, Dao Zhang." Mu Ruian looked at the table. "Please accept my apologies for disrupting your meal." I laughed dryly. We were clearly the only ones eating in his room, and yet he was still being so polite. Heng Wen, sitting with his back to the bed all this time, turned to give him a sidelong smile. "Don't worry about it, young master. We are the ones who've imposed on you." Mu Ruian instantly froze, as if he was at the summit of a frigid mountain and a basin of icy water had been poured over his head. His gaze was astonished, and his complexion turned ghastly pale. Heng Wen leisurely rose to his feet. "Looks like you still remember this humble one. The innkeeper looked left and right. So, both young masters actually know each other. No wonder Daozang went to such efforts to cure the young master. Haha, haha, turns out all of you are old acquaintances. You must have an affinity with one another indeed if you have met in my humble inn, haha. This Daoist priest had to play an outsider, so I remained standing where I was. Mu Ruian looked at Heng Wen and said in a hoarse voice, "You. It is truly an affinity that has brought us together here," Heng Wen said. Bouncing back to health after a severe illness is like getting a new lease on life. Since everything that occurred is in the past, let's just treat it as history of a former life. Forget about it all, and live well in the future. Cupping his hands, he then said to the innkeeper, "May I trouble you to move the dishes downstairs? The Daozang and I shall have our meals in the hall. Let this young master rest." The innkeeper acknowledged the request, and the waiters nimbly tidied the plates away. The fox jumped off the chair and slipped into Heng Wen's arms. "Beside me," Heng Wen whispered, "are you going to stay here or dine downstairs with me?" Mu Ruian's gaze followed over, his eyes glinting. Something about them looked very different from earlier. I felt a chill run down my spine. Raising a palm, I said, "Benefactor, please have a good rest. This humble Daoist shall take my leave." I followed Heng Wen out the door, and in the instant I turned, I saw Mu Ruian's cheerless eyes. The potency of the fox's Jin Loyal Lingzi was extremely good. I was beginning to regret curing Tianchu. At dusk, while Heng Wen and I were dining in the brightly lit downstairs hall, Mu Ruian came out and wandered around. He wore a long, light blue gown, walking very quietly but steadily. His gown fluttered around his body. It was clear at a glance that he had not merely recovered from a severe illness, but had bounced back to his feet. Mu Ruian came down the stairs and headed for the hall. I stood, raised my palm, and asked after him. Meanwhile, Heng Wen nodded his head. After Mu Ruian returned the greeting, he seated himself at a table beside ours. A waiter attended to him as he placed his order. Heng Wen was not particularly talkative, so this immortal lord was a little gloomy about that. I sat opposite Heng Wen, while Furball crouched on a chair next to him, looking like the very picture of guilelessness as he ate the scrambled egg Heng Wen fed him. Heng Wen picked the chopped green onion out of the egg, and used his chopsticks to move the pieces to Fox's plate one at a time. The fox ate them, one mouthful at a time, and after it was done, it licked its whiskers. It looked up at Heng Wen, wagging its tail. This immortal lord watched nonchalantly, and ate my porridge with indifference. From time to time, I picked at the autumnal garland chrysanthemum leaves in my food. The waiters stood to the side and watched too. "Young master, you're too amazing. This beast is so obedient before you. The way it eats is so interesting." I sneered to myself. It would be even more interesting if it transforms into its human form and exhibits its pectoral muscles. Imagine, a fully grown man wagging his tail with his head lowered. There were a few guests staying at the riverfront inn. Everyone in the hall was looking at the fox, as was Mu Ruian. At a table in the corner, one of several rotund men merchants, they looked like said, "Do you two gentlemen have a miracle working method to taming a wild creature into such an obedient animal?" Heng Wen smiled mildly, while I answered, "Oh, no, you flatter us. It's actually just a small trick." The fox glanced very disrespectfully at this immortal lord out of the corner of its eyes. I added, "It's actually easy to tame wildlife. All you need is a bowl of water blessed with the ashes of a talisman from this humble Daoist, and their wild nature will be immediately eradicated." The others from that particular table all addressed the rotund man who spoke as Squire Dong. Squire Dong eyed this immortal lord skeptically and said, "This humble one has traveled over most of the world, yet I never knew that the Daoist arts could still be used in such a way." I held my beard and said nothing. Not speaking at the appropriate time was the hallmark of a great master. Immediately, a waiter chimed in, "Squire Dong might not know this, but this Guanjian Daozang is indeed a great master. Look at the young master at this table. Guanjian. Dao Zhang was the one who cured him using only a dose of medicine. He is truly a miraculous physician, capable of bringing the dying back to life. Squire Dong and his fellow rotund men were instantly filled with deep reverence, and repeatedly apologized for the lack of manners. Likewise, I repeatedly deflected their praises with humility. Then Squire Dong said, Dao Zhang has such a brilliant air, like that of an immortal, so you must also be adept in the art of subduing evil and resurrecting the dead. Seeing as it was straying far off track, I could only say, occasionally, when there is unrest in a residence haunted by evil beings, this humble Daoist could muster my meager abilities to expel them. As for resurrecting the dead, I wouldn't dare to boast of it. Life, death, and fate naturally fall under the jurisdiction of the underworld. This humble Daoist has yet to break free of the 6 paths of existence to attain immortality, so how could I dare to talk big about life and death? Squire Dong, admiring this immortal lord's humility, sighed in appreciation. Heng Wen idly pointed around the plate with the tip of his chopsticks. He had fed the entire plate of egg to the fox, and all that was left were the black fungus mushrooms, chopped green onions, and ginger that he had picked out earlier. As I reached my chopsticks out toward the black fungus mushrooms, I heard Mu Ruian say, as they say, karmic affinity begins at birth and perishes at death. But then, where do those souls that come to collect their debts, and those spirits with fury and resentment, come from? Or is that just a rumor? I picked up the black fungus mushrooms to put into my bowl of porridge, considering how to respond when Heng Wen suddenly chimed in, it's really hard to say when it comes to such matters. Whether it's a rumor or not remains to be seen. Living in this world can be likened to a person staying in a house. When the house is not livable anymore, that's when death and the extinction of affinity are imminent. But even if your affinity with this house has ended, you might still have some affinity with another house. He pointed the chopsticks at me. For instance, this Dao Zhang said he won't come back from the dead, but perhaps he might swap over to another house to live in. Heng Wen, are you trying to tear down my facade and sabotage me? All at once, Mu Ruian's eyes latched onto this immortal lord. I let out a dry laugh. Young Master Zhao's joke is so witty, this humble Daoist is at a loss as to how to react. Heng Wen set down his chopsticks, and the fox sprang onto his lap and yawned. Then Heng Wen excused himself, and swaggered up the stairs with the fox in his arms. Thus, I also returned to my room. In the hallway, I hesitated whether to return to my room or head to Heng Wen's. After a moment of pondering, I went to Heng Wen's room, and pushed the door open. Heng Wen was seated at the table, drinking tea. I joined him. Heng Wen lifted the teapot, and I picked up a cup and held it before the spout. You want to save even this bit of energy? Heng Wen quipped. Pour a cup for me, and I will refill the remaining tea for you, I said with a smile. Heng Wen scoffed, and filled the teacup in my hand to the brim. I glanced at the fox lying on the bed. Furball, I have a matter to discuss with you. Lead the way tonight. Qing Jun and I will make a trip to your cave, and release the Shan person whom you've locked up. The fox jumped to the ground, transformed into its human form, and stood leaning against the bedpost with a frown on his face. The wound Shan Shengling had inflicted on his arm was still there. The fox must still be feeling indignant, and his face turned livid on hearing that I was telling him to let his prisoner go. Qing Jun and I descended to the mortal world for official business on orders, I explained, and the person you've locked up just so happened to be a key player. Truth be told, this immortal lord has some feud with this person. If not for heaven's decree holding me back, this immortal lord would even be willing to build a fire to roast him for supper, if you so wanted. The fox folded his arms, reticent until Heng Wen said, Song Yao Yuan Jun is telling you the truth. Although this is unfair to you, we still hope you can help us. The fox immediately answered meekly, since Qing Jun wishes to release him, I'll let him go tonight. He looked like he was willing to lay down his life for him. And so, in the middle of the night, the fox and I set off for its lair. Heng Wen lifted my real form out and said he would not be going since his present appearance was similar to his real looks, and he feared that it would complicate matters if Shan Shengling were to find out. On hearing that Heng Wen was not going, the fox pulled a glum face. He led this immortal lord to his mountain stronghold, saying nothing the entire way. The night was dark, and the wind, strong. There happened to be a tailwind when we set off, so riding the wind and the clouds took us only a little more than a quarter of an hour to arrive at the fox's mountain home. The fox and I landed halfway up the mountain, lush with tall tree shadows and thick, long grass. I asked the fox for the name of this mountain, and the fox answered me in a frosty tone, Mount Xian Qing. Xian as in Xian Li, Qing as in Heng Wen Qing Jun. This immortal lord cringed for a moment. What was this mountain called before you gave it this name? Mount Kuteng, the fox answered resentfully. After walking a few steps with his head lowered, he asked, How did you know I changed the name? I did not answer. Geez, when this immortal lord was out of love and reciting poems in the mortal world, you were still out there somewhere stealing some household's chickens. The fox's cave entrance was concealed within the vine leaves climbing all over the mountain cliff, along a long and narrow stone path that meandered its way inside. This was a fox that knew how to live it up. He had dug a channel of water across the road ahead, with a stone bridge above it. After crossing the bridge, we rounded the edge of a stone screen. The fox raised his sleeve, and flicked forth a flame that lit up torches on the four walls, revealing another scenic abode, a fairly spacious stone cave that had been decorated to resemble a furnished hall. There were fruits and vegetables, wine and snacks displayed on the stone table, and the stone chairs were padded with satin and brocade cushions. To the right, there was even a screen with a colored glaze, inlaid with cowries. I was just about to praise the fox's stone lair, but the fox, standing in the center of the hall, frowned and muttered, Something's amiss. He then strode to the other side of the screen. This immortal lord followed suit. There was another stone path with countless forks behind the screen. The fox moved swiftly ahead, and I was close behind. After turning several bends, he opened a stone door and entered yet another cave. The fox raised his hand to light up a torch. There was only a bare pillar in the cave, and broken pieces of chains lay scattered at the foot of the pillar. From the looks of it, the fox had locked Shan Shengling up here. I looked at the scattered chains with a frown. Who would have known Shan Shengling was brave and strong enough to break free and flee? The fox ground his teeth, and hissed something hatefully before dashing from the cave. He turned 70 or 80 bends along the stone path before opening yet another stone door. A gust of wind from outside blew its way in. I raised my head, and to my surprise, was able to see the dark sky. This place was a fissure in the mountain, which the fox had made into an inner courtyard. A small, black figure sprang from the shadows and leaped straight toward us. A whimper of a sob followed as the figure buried itself into the fox's arms and squirmed for a bit. Then it transformed into a young, innocent boy who wrapped his arms around the fox and bawled, "Oh, great king! You're finally back!" A sob. Someone powerful came and rescued the guy locked up in the cave. Hong Hong, Kaihuju, Hua, Zioki, and the others, that person put them all in a cage, sobs. I managed to hide myself, though it wasn't easy. I was so afraid, sob, sob, oh, great king. The boy burrowed his head into the fox's arms, crying and smearing his tears and snot as he recounted what had happened. When he finally stopped, the fox led the both of us back to the stone hall. The boy shrank into a chair, still sobbing and sniffling while sneaking glances at this immortal lord. He had a pair of lush green eyes, and the two pointed ears at the top of his head still had grayish-brown stripes. So it seemed that this child had originally been a mountain cat spirit. The little mountain cat spirit was unclear in his speech, speaking incoherently. He stammered for a long time before he managed to give a rough account of what had happened. Supposedly, someone with a horsetail whisk had barged into the cave this morning, abducted Shan Shengling, and captured a dozen or so of the demons and spirits residing here. There were pretty vixens and other minor demons whose cultivation was not high enough. The mountain cat's cultivation was the shallowest, and his demonic aura was the weakest. It was only by burrowing into a crevice in a corner that he got to preserve his little life. The fox's expression was livid, and his gaze, harsh. This immortal lord knew that he and Shan Shengling were now sworn enemies. The little mountain cat could not clearly describe the appearance of the guest with the horsetail whisk who had saved Shan Shengling. After some back and forth, all he said was that he had no beard, looked like a Daoist priest, and wore blue clothes. Then he aggrievedly extended his two injured front paws to show the fox. This immortal lord listened and looked, but I had to say, since the man in the cave is already gone, my matter here is considered done. It's late now, and I have to return to the inn. I looked at the fox and the little mountain cat. What are both of your plans? The fox said nothing. The little mountain cat huddled up and shrank back in the chair. The fox's tiny mountain stronghold of demons and spirits was now empty, and he looked rather miserable as he sat there with his head hanging. There was no knowing if the powerful guest with the horsetail whisk would come barging back in. The fox and this little mountain cat were both in peril. This immortal lord was actually an easily soft-hearted person. Seeing such a sight now, my heart could not help but soften a tiny bit. Just this tiny bit, and by the time I returned to Heng Wen's room, I had behind me a fox and a grey-striped mountain cat. The fox jumped onto Heng Wen's lap, let out a whimper, coiled itself, and lay down, downcast. Heng Wen stroked the top of the fox's head. The fox looked up and licked Heng Wen's hand. The little mountain cat leaped onto the corner of the quilt at the end of the bed and lay there, smacking its lips and licking its injured front paws. I truly regretted this tiny softening of my heart. End chapter. Peach Blossom Det. Chapter 11. Mu Ruian and Shan Shengling would meet on an afternoon when the wind and waves raged and the rain poured in torrents. By the next day, I had brought the fox and the mountain cat cub to settle down in the inn. Heng Wen and I happened to be in the hall downstairs having our lunch when someone rapped hard on the inn's tightly shut doors. The waiter opened the doors a crack, and the gale blew the rainwater into the inn, sending splatters of froth onto the stir-fried vegetarian dish before me. A drenched figure wearing a bamboo hat strode across the threshold, just as a sudden clap of thunder detonated in the sky. This fellow with the bamboo hat took off that bamboo hat, raising the fox's hackles. This sharp-eyed immortal lord moved swiftly to hold down the fox. Shan Shengling stood tall and proud in the hall, and surveyed his surroundings with his bright eyes. His eyes fell upon this table and landed on Heng Wen. All at once, his eyes narrowed, and his eyebrows twitched almost imperceptibly. His expression, however, did not change in the slightest, never once betraying his feelings. Heng Wen politely flashed him a half-smile. Nanming Dijun was indeed something. After returning Heng Wen's smile in kind, his electric gaze immediately swept over to this immortal lord's face. This immortal lord initially meant to raise a palm in greeting, but both of my hands were occupied with the struggling fox, so I could only give a nod. Shan Shengling's gaze passed nonchalantly over the fox. Just then, the innkeeper rushed over, bowing at the waist. "Master Chen, you're finally back. We will prepare hot water and a change of clothes for you right away. Would you like a jar of wine first to warm yourself up?" This innkeeper was really so clueless, currying for favor with bath water and warming wine, I thought. Other than that frail scholar who was his lover in the room up there, is there room for anything else in his heart right now? Yet of all things you could have brought up, you just had to omit him. As expected, Shan Shengling spoke. "How has that young Master Yan upstairs been these few days?" It was then the innkeeper suddenly saw the light. As he answered, "Good, good," he had the waiter lead the way. He then apologized for the unsatisfactory service, saying they had been a poor host to that other young master, so would Master Chen please forgive them? Shan Shengling took big strides up the stairs. He had only just reached the midway mark when he braked to a stop and looked straight ahead. Mu Ruian stood at the end of those stairs, gripping the railing tightly with one hand. Two pairs of eyes locked as they gazed at each other. Such a sight was immeasurably touching. And incredibly mushy. So mushy that even the fox could not stand it. He twitched beneath my hands and went still. After trading gazes in silence for a moment, Shan Shengling asked Mu Ruian, "Are you feeling better these days?" "Much better now," Mu Ruian answered. Shan Shengling uttered an "oh," strode up the stairs, and returned to the room with Mu Ruian. The rest of their conversation was inaudible. We returned to the room after our meals, and as soon as the door was bolted, the little mountain cat lunged over. "Great king, great king! I saw the man whom you locked up in the cave." "That man, he." The fox shifted into his human form, voice icy. "I've already seen him." His fists were clenched tight, and his eyes had a murderous gleam in them. The enmity brought on by the capture of the demons and spirits from his cave ran as deep as the sea. He must be itching to spring over next door and flay Shan Shengling alive. This immortal lord had no choice but to advise Furball to keep calm. Shan Shengling had returned alone to the inn, and we still had no idea who the person who had captured an entire cave of demons alive was. Nanming had quite a few good friends in the heavenly court. Could they possibly dare to defy the Jade Emperor's decree to help Nanming down here in the mortal world? So I said, "We still don't know where your lair of demons is locked up. If you act without careful consideration and hurt Nanming, your little demons might very well end up losing their lives. Let's not act rashly for the time being." Furball clenched his fists so hard that they cracked. He stood still by the table. I opened the door and shouted for a plate of fried crucian carp lunch for the mountain cat. The waiter clicked his tongue and marveled, "Dao Zhang, you sure have a good appetite. You just had your lunch, and now you want a snack." I laughed. "Just something to aid digestion." In the afternoon, Shan Shengling came knocking on this immortal lord's door. He had already taken a bath and changed into a set of dry, fresh clothes. His cheeks were slightly sunken, no surprise given his days of captivity in the fox's cave. Still, he was full of spirit and energy. On entering the room, he cupped his hands and said, "Dao Zhang, I have already heard of how you've miraculously saved Yan Zimu from death. Yan Zimu is this humble one's sworn brother, and so I've come to offer my thanks." His gaze that was as cutting as blades coolly sized up this immortal lord. With both hands, he held out a red paper envelope. "This is but a modest token of gratitude. Please do not turn it down, Dao Zhang." I raised a palm, and said, "Benefactor, you're too polite. It was merely some herbal prescription. As a deist, this humble one ought not to accept money from the material world. But seeing as you're sincere, this humble deist shall regard it as your donation to the art of Daoism and accept it for the time being." I did not stand on ceremony at all as I accepted it and squeezed it in my hand. It was heavy, perhaps a gold bar. "It seems to me that Dao Zhang and that young master next door are fellow travelers?" Shan Shengling asked. I smoothly made up a story. "That's right. The young master is very fond of the art of Daoism. He wishes to find a quiet spot to cultivate, so he travels with this humble deist. We often study the art of elixirs together. So, the deist master is skilled in the art of concocting elixir pills," Shan Shengling said. "Not exactly," I said. "Actually, this humble deist is more adept in divining the future and reading feng shui. The middle of your forehead is full, and your bone structure is refined. It's the face of a comfortable and distinguished station in life, and one with such a face is blessed with ancestral blessings in a peaceful, carefree life. Benefactor, would you like this humble deist to divine a fortune for you and read your luck in recent days?" Shan Shengling retracted his gaze. "This humble one is a little tired today. Perhaps on another date." He turned to leave. I took a large, dramatic stride forward. Benefactor, do you really not want me to tell your fortune? This humble daist's divination art was personally imparted by Taishang Laojun himself in a dream. One telling costs only 10 coins. Since this humble daist is acquainted with your sworn brother, then just 8 coins will do. I can additionally read a character to tell your fortune. What do you think? Shan Shengling answered that he would surely have his fortune read another day and strode away. I heaved a long sigh and closed the door. Behind me, a voice said, I'll fork out 20 coins. May I ask of Daozang to divine my fortune? I turned. Heng Wen was all grins as he sat by the table. I dragged over a chair to sit beside him, and picked up the teapot to pour his cup to the brim. Do you want King Wen's divination with copper coins or Gigutsi's divination with 8 characters? Is it not Song Yao Yuan Jun's divination? Heng Wen asked. Finally, I could not refrain from laughing. You sure are a carefree one. Instead of watching Furball in the room, you come and watch the show here. Those few words of yours had quite the impact on him. I don't think he will act rashly, Heng Wen said. The entire lair of demons had been taken captive. Both of them looked so pitiful, I left them in the other room to calm down. Shan Shengling just so happened to come knocking, and I couldn't resist the urge to come and watch. He drank a mouthful of tea. Your act as a daist priest is quite convincing. You are looking more and more like a cultivator. Of course, I said smugly. I had my fortune told all day long when I was in the mortal world, having them read from countless fortune-telling stalls, so much that I can do better than those who had just joined the trade. If I were to violate the rules of heaven someday and get banished back to the mortal world, I'd really go and be a fortune-teller. Business is guaranteed to be good. Holding his cup, Heng Wen shook his head. More like you've gotten addicted to playing a daist priest. I've heard that all mortals love fortune-telling. Like how you used to have your fortune told all the time back then. What did you ask about? Didn't I tell you before? I said. When I was 7 years old, my father invited some master from the mountain to divine my fortune. That master said I had great luck and would get to enjoy a very rare blessing, but that I was doomed to a fate of eternal solitude. I refused to believe this, so I went all over to have my fortune told. And yet, there was nothing to be said at all whenever it came to my marriage. Bringing this up made me sigh again. This immortal lord had been 7 years of age and already cognizant of many things. I still remembered Steward Su's daughter, Feng Niang, a little maiden about 12 or 13 years old at that time. I had liked her very much. I was just planning to tell my father that I was going to marry her as my wife after I grew up, when the old daist priest dealt me a blow so hard I saw stars. But that daist priest's jinx of a mouth did indeed prove accurate, and Feng Niang married the son of a merchant at 14. Indignant, I had run to ask her why she forgot all those affections I had showered on her osmanthus cakes, puff pastries, and walnut cookies. Feng Niang petted the top of my head and said, "Young master, you are still ignorant of the ways of the world. And besides, how could a person like me dream of climbing the social ladder by associating with you?" I had watched helplessly as Feng Niang got into the red sedan and was carried away with great fanfare. My father had also arranged a betrothal for me. She was the precious daughter of a minister. The matchmaker said she was a ravishing beauty, and her 8 characters and almanac readings were extremely compatible with mine. She and I were a match made in heaven. In the end, she fell in love with the 3rd prince's heir, and one moonless, windy night, the both of them brazenly eloped. I got engaged again, this time to the daughter of the emperor's brother-in-law. She eloped with her older cousin. Another engagement to the commandery princess of a commandery prince. The emperor took a fancy to her and acquired her for his harem. To make it up to me, the emperor bestowed upon me the hand of his younger sister, the 8th princess. She had an illicit affair with a young vice minister, and even got pregnant with his child. I had loitered around the pleasure quarters and fell in love at first sight with the top courtesan. I poured all my love and sincerity into it, but how did it turn out? She still ended up becoming lovers with a poor scholar. It was completely by a fluke that I became an immortal and indeed got to enjoy a blessing that the common people would never get to experience. Every prediction of the old deist had proven itself to be true. So, one could not help but believe in this thing called fate. Heng Wen yawned. All right. I get it. I get how miserable and forlorn you are. I've been listening to you for so many thousands of years, my ears have become calloused. Can't you change your wording? You are always harping on and on about how you are doomed to a fate of eternal solitude. Are you not happy being an immortal in heaven? I am, I answered. But you were born an immortal, so you don't know the power of this thing called love. Once you have a taste of it, you'll never forget it. Why else would Tianzhu and Nanming next door be reduced to such a state today instead of being their exalted lordships? Oh, that makes sense, Heng Wen said as he turned the teacup. Interesting, how interesting. If the Jade Emperor were to hear you, he would surely take it as you have still not rid yourself of your mortal roots and expel you back to the mortal world. But I was really regretting blabbing on so much. I grabbed Heng Wen's sleeve and said, whether the Jade Emperor hears me or not is of secondary importance. I was merely just spouting nonsense. Don't you think of finding someone to try it with just because you find it interesting? Heng Wen patted me on my shoulder and reassured me with a smile. Don't worry. I won't find someone else to try it with. It was getting dark. When we went downstairs for our meals, I casually asked about Mu Ruiyan and Shan Shengling. The waiter replied that they had already eaten and gone back to their respective rooms. The fox and mountain cat were still stricken over their fellow demons, so we simply left them in Heng Wen's room to grieve, while Heng Wen and I moved to my room. I pondered it over in my mind, but I still could not figure out who rescued Nanming. Then it occurred to me Nanming would surely tell Tianzhu the whole story now that he had gone and returned. It was likely he would not keep Tianzhu in the dark about these matters. I conferred with Heng Wen about spying in Nanming's room. Shan Shengling's room was at the end of the corridor. Tianzhu's room was beside it, and this immortal lord's room was right next to Tianzhu's. Heng Wen lifted my real form out. Concealed in midair, we headed for our destination, but we never expected to take the long way round to Nanming's room only to find it empty. He must be in Tianzhu's room. So, Heng Wen and I entered Tianzhu's room. And what a sight greeted us! Mu Ruiyan and Shan Shengling were entwined together, about to stir up a storm under the sheets. Mu Ruiyan's back was pressed up against the bedpost. All that remained on his body was a thin robe partially opened at the bosom. His eyes were partially shut, and he was gasping slightly. Meanwhile, Shan Shengling gnawed on Mu Ruiyan's neck even as one of his hands slowly removed the latter's robe, and his other hand wandered down. Amitabha! This immortal lord has really been an immortal far too long. To think I had forgotten about the most inopportune time to come calling. Hey, they're so enthusiastic with their dual cultivation, aren't they? Heng Wen remarked. I hurriedly dragged Heng Wen Qingjun away and crashed back into our room. What a sin, what a sin! Mortals who see this will get styes in their eyes for sure. This lord here is an immortal, Heng Wen said. Besides, you and I entered purely by coincidence, and we only had just the one look. I sat down silently in front of the bed. Heng Wen waved his worn folding fan. There's nothing to feel uncomfortable about. Don't tell me you never did it as a mortal. I let out a dry cough. I have, but it was all with women, which is slightly different from this sort of cultivating. Yeah, Heng Wen concurred. I've seen illustrations in the books. They are indeed a little different. Shocked, I jumped to my feet. In the books? What books? Why would you be looking at them? Oh, good lord! If the Jade Emperor were to discover that Heng Wen-Qing-jun had returned with his mind choked full of obscene stuff after this one trip to the mortal realm, he would surely send a flash of lightning right onto my head and obliterate me to ashes. Why are you so startled? Heng Wen said. Since I'm in charge of the instruction of literary ethics in the world, I naturally have to look at all kinds of books. Back then, when I was at Dong Jun's manor, I had nothing to do, so I went to the marketplace to buy a few illustration books and flipped through them, wanting to see how dual cultivation was done. He felt around his sleeves and fished out a tiny object in his palm. In an instant, the object enlarged into a stack of books with ink blue covers. He lifted them and patted each before setting them on the table. I reached out for one of the books to flip through, and saw stars. It was erotica. What's more, it was homoerotica of men thick in the act. Back when I was a mortal, I had seen my fair share of erotica. My closest friends and I often commented on the books and appreciated them together. We even traded our rare editions. However, enticing Heng Wen-Qing-jun to look at erotica was a crime that was no joking matter in the heavenly court. I was still comfortable in my role as an immortal, and I had no wish to be escorted up the immortal execution terrace to be struck by lightning. I broke out in a cold sweat looking at the books. It was only after looking that I realized that dual cultivation was indeed an art that calls for careful study, Heng Wen remarked in a particularly relaxed manner. A pity the illustrations weren't well drawn and were a little of a turn-off. That's because you bought the common ones on the market, I could not help but say. Those kinds are all crudely drawn. There's nothing novel about them. The real, rare editions cannot be bought from the marketplace bookshops. You have to go through special channels to get your hands on them. The illustrations in those are what I'd call fascinating. Oh! Heng Wen said with great zest. I felt like smacking this damn mouth of mine. Nanming and Tianchu, having not seen each other for a long time, were thick in the throes of passion, and by the time Heng Wen and I blew out the lamps to go to bed, the sound of activity next door was reverberating over in bursts. The creaking bedboard. Mu Ruian's intermittent moans. The sounds of which made this immortal lord feel restless of mind and unsettled of heart. Fortunately, Guanjianzi's body was lying ramrod straight on the ground, putting the brake to many a number of sinful desires. Staring at Guanjianzi, I calmed my nerves and breathing. Beside me, Heng Wen asked, "What are you doing, craning your neck and poking your head out from bed?" "Lust is in the air," I said, "and Heng Wen-Qing-jun lies beside me. I fear my immortal roots will waver, and I will commit a great sin. So I'm looking at Guanjianzi to still my mind." Heng Wen chuckled. The sight of the old man lying on the ground does indeed have that calming effect. "Keep on looking, then." I heard him roll over and moved no further. He had probably fallen asleep. Looking at Guanjianzi gradually exhausted me, and I, too, fell asleep. And then I had a dream. I rarely dreamed after I became immortal, and this dream was exceptionally different. In my days, I stood amidst a grove of peach blossom trees. The blooming brilliance of the peach blossom surpassed that of heaven's rosy clouds. In the inner reaches of the mist, an indistinct figure stood, and as I approached, he turned his head back, stupefying me. What an immortal dreamed was his true desire. I understood I was in a dream right now, and when I saw him, I understood that this dream was my one true desire. I could smother this want, but I could not deceive myself. What I was unsure of was when I started to even have this kind of desire. Perhaps it all began several thousand years ago, when I saw him from afar in the heavenly palace of heaven. Distinguished and refined, he was so near before my eyes, yet so far beyond my reach. And yet, I could not help but want to get closer. For several thousands of years, I had lived a carefree life, filled with gratitude toward heaven. I had originally been doomed to a fate of eternal solitude, unable to seek what I so willfully sought. But I got to see him often, and for that, I was content. In any case, I was an immortal who had become one by a fluke, and I had excuses even if I was unable to break clean of my mortal roots. It was just like the time before my ascension, when I clearly knew that I could not have the moon in my hands, and yet there were times I really wanted to pluck it from the sky. And the dream, at this moment, was a reflection of my filthy heart. Since this was a dream of my true desire, I could let myself go, to my heart's content. I hugged the person before me and kissed him. What were dreams for? They were for kissing lips I did not dare to kiss, removing clothes I did not dare to remove, doing deeds I could never do as an immortal. It was all worth it, I thought the very instant I lifted his waist. Even if the Jade Emperor were to reduce me to ashes with a strike of lightning, it was all worth it. Even though this was only a dream, I had no regrets. Before I woke, I could remember feeling immensely completed. As I embraced him in my arms under the rosy clouds like peach blossoms, I told him I had, in truth, liked him for several thousand years. That I had been thinking of him for several thousand years. As he leaned against my shoulder, he softly said, I, too, have been thinking of you for several thousand years. And then, I woke up. The moment I opened my eyes, I saw the canopy of the bed. I turned my head to the left, saw the empty quilt and pillow, then turned my head to the right and saw Guanjianzi lying on the ground. Heng Wen, rested and refreshed, was waiting in his room to have breakfast with me. Furball was crouching gloomily on the stool, while the mountain cat was lying sorrowfully by the bed. What sweet dream did you have last night? Heng Wen asked. When I left, you were grinning like a fool, and you wore an obscene expression. I let out 2 dry laughs. I dreamed that the Jade Emperor gave me a promotion. End chapter.